We're going to begin on page 485. We're looking at Parashat Terumah. There's a lot of good stuff in here. A lot of people find this one to be a little plotting. I think it probably depends on how mechanical you are, how much you like working with your hands and that sort of thing. If construction projects aren't really your thing, then Parashat Terumah can be sort of hard to jump into. But I like it a lot. Maybe because I like building things. But we're going to take a look here, beginning on page 485. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarn, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for the setting, for the ephod and for the breastplate." All right, let's pause there. There's some good stuff in there already. So that English translation is a little rough, if you want my opinion. Each one of these things, as described in the Hebrew, is open to conversation. If you're in the Etz Chaim, you can see some notes about these sort of things. I mean, some of them we know what zahav is. We know zahav is gold. That's not really up for much conversation. But some of these are getting a little more obscure. But before we get into that, I just want to point out that the entire premise needs some clarification, because what we're talking about here are people who are wandering in the wilderness, who escaped as refugees in the middle of the night, and now they're going to build this thing out of rare jewels and fine yarn, and it's all a little strange. You wouldn't expect this group of people necessarily to be able to build something so fabulous, just in terms of the material available. We live in a very different time than our ancestors did. They didn't have things lying around the way we do. They didn't have a basement full of stuff the way we do. They didn't throw things out the way we do. The bottles in my recycle bin would have been a small fortune in ancient times. A plastic bottle you can reuse, you put the cap on. It's amazing. It's amazing. They never would have thrown that out. That would have been a family heirloom. So to imagine that this group of people has these materials it's a little strange, but there actually is a basis for it in the text. Because when we left Egypt, the story goes in an earlier parsha, we left with a bunch of stuff. We left with a bunch of stuff that had belonged to the Egyptians. They essentially paid us our back wages as we walked out the door, and they did it with gold and silver and fine yarn and all these sort of things. All right, any thoughts about that, or anyone want to jump in? All right, well, we'll keep going here. So I want to sort of take a look. We're gonna zoom in here. So if you look at verse 4, the different color of yarn, we have techelet, argaman, and tolat shani. So techelet you will probably recognize as the blue thread that is on the tzitzit. A few people have this in modern times. Most people don't. It's debatable whether or not the proper technology of the blue thread has been recovered. But nonetheless, these are the most expensive colors in the ancient Near East. Techelet and argaman were produced using a secretion of a snail that was only found in Lebanon. And archaeologists have found enormous piles of these shells because this was a booming industry, and the ancient word for Lebanon, Phoenicia, probably comes from their word for this snail or for the color that it produces. And these were colors that were very hard to get any other way. By the time you enter into the early modern period, this blue and purple can be chemically accomplished with the same with the same purity and the same trueness with indigo, with the indigo plant. So that if you're familiar with indigo, that might give you some sense of the color that we're talking about here. And there was some debate about whether the snail was used to produce blue or produce purple. Some people said, no, it's definitely you use the snail to make the blue, the techelet, for the tzitzit. And other people said, no, it's definitely for the purple. It's the royal purple. If you know the story of Julius Caesar, who dressed himself in royal purple and made everyone real upset. Or the Byzantine emperors had a special room where their children would be born, and they were said to be born into the purple. Turns out it's both. It turns out you can make the dye blue or purple depending on how much time you leave it out in the sun. So those are both two options. And the crimson, as you can see in the note here, probably made with the eggs of certain insects that can be found in oak trees. And so this is not so different probably from modern cochineal extract. Some of you might know, maybe you have a family custom to throw out the red candies or something like this. And this is because for many years and decades, red food dye was made with beetles that were crushed up, and the red color was extracted from them. And so food that might otherwise be kosher, it got a little trickier because it had well, yeah, the extract of beetles. All right, I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking. I want to open the floor if anyone has any thoughts about this. If anyone has any comments.
Yeah, wasn't there some with the red dye made from beetles? Was that the controversy with the Starbucks strawberry drink?
Yes, it was.
A few years
Yes,
ago?
that's right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. A lot of people who keep kosher got real accustomed to going to Starbucks because it's just coffee, right? And then the Starbucks menu got more and more expansive, and pretty soon there were all sorts of things that you probably shouldn't get at Starbucks, which was upsetting for people who had gotten into the habit of going there.
So if something was kosher, could you get an extract of that, and would that be okay in whatever concoction you're formulating?
Yeah, if you could make a dye out of a kosher animal, then
Well, I'm talking about a food food substance that you might use in
Sure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with food dye in and of itself. No, the only question is where does it come from? And actually, I shouldn't quote in his name unless I'm completely certain about this, which I'm not. But I'm fairly certain there was a prominent Orthodox rabbi in the middle part of the 20th century who ruled that cochineal extract is what we call devar chadash, which is something, a new thing, that it's so fundamentally transformed through a chemical process from its original state that it loses the status of being a non-kosher insect. It's just a vat of chemicals at that point.
Okay, so here's where I was going with that. So it's usually a dinner topic whenever I'm out at dinner for work, but beaver secrete.
Yes.
That's used in the production of vanilla ice cream, right? So
Sometimes.
Yes.
So this is increasingly rare to use the we're really getting into it now.
Well, you brought it up.
The anal gland of the beaver is used in some vanilla ice cream. Yes.
Candies and other stuff.
Right. But
start the work. So
it's actually kind of hard to find these days because there's so many good chemical substitutes.
I've talked to people that know that rabbi. but I gotta admit, I'm pretty impressed that you know that.
A lot of old style food products are hard to find. I was trying to find authentic licorice, and black licorice is today. It's almost always made with a with just flavor substitutes. It's very hard to find actual black licorice, which is probably for the best because it does contain a small amount of poison. So it's no harm to have one piece of black licorice, but you shouldn't eat a whole bag. You probably shouldn't eat a whole bag of candy anyway. That's that might not be healthy. All right, we'll keep going here. There's another one here. We're really gonna have some fun. Because you were probably like me, you were hearing the English and you said, what, dolphin? Dolphin skins? And no, that is the JPS here is bringing us a sort of received English translation going all the way back to the King James version and even earlier. But it's I think this is a very poor translation. I think the dolphin is a very weird choice of word. Now, if you want to get into it in terms of the sort of tradition, because the Gemara, the Talmud asks, what is this tachash? We have this animal here. Well, we presume it's an animal because we're getting its skin. The orot tachashim, but we don't know this word from other places in the Bible. This is a word that shows up here. I can't remember if it never shows up again. If it does, it doesn't show up again very often, and it doesn't show up in a helpful way. It doesn't show up in a way where you say, "Oh yeah, okay." And so the rabbis say, "What is this animal? What do we know about it?" And they think it's a kosher animal. Well, there's a debate about it, but most rabbis in the Talmud say that you wouldn't build the Mishkan with a non-kosher animal. So it's got to be a kosher animal, and then they describe it. It's got a horn in the middle, and essentially what they're describing is a unicorn. Which, I mean, spoiler alert, that's not real either. So you got a problem here. Now, if you're willing to sort of set aside the Talmud and say maybe the rabbis didn't quite know what they were talking about here, there is a similar word in certain southern dialects of Arabic that point to weasel or ermine, which those are skins that people use. I mean, even to this day, those are pretty fancy furs. So it's entirely possible that that's what this text is referring to. There's a rabbi in Israel named Natan Slifkin who has written some truly amazing books, and he is a modern Orthodox rabbi. He left the Haredi world when his book was put in Cherem, when they put his book on the banned book list, because he was very interested in zoological matters in the Torah, in the Talmud, and looking at some of the scientific conclusions of the rabbis of the Talmud, which turn out to be not very good. So the rabbis of the Talmud, they knew a lot of things. They didn't know science the way we know it, and that's just what it is. They weren't scientists. They were using the best information they had available to them, but a lot of it wasn't very good. And this got him kicked out of his community. This got him sent away. But he has a zoo, basically. It's sort of like a I don't know if zoo is exactly the right word, but it's sort of like an animal sanctuary. That you can go see some of the animals that are described in the Bible, and he's got a lot of ideas about exactly this sort of thing. And he thinks that tachash is a giraffe, because sometimes the giraffe does grow a sort of pseudo horn in the middle, and it is a kosher animal, although we don't have a tradition of eating it, but it does meet all the qualifications for being kosher. And their skins would be pretty cool looking. I mean, if you built something and you used giraffe skin. It would have a distinctive look. It would be an interesting sort of thing. But who knows? We have no way of knowing. We know the dolphin is a very bad translation, but they're going with it here.
This is after the Red Sea parted, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so there are fish that are in the deep sea that have appendages that sticking out from there, and scale fish. So I mean,
Sure, yeah.
So I find it interesting this came after, obviously, after the Red Sea parted, because maybe they saw this kind of fish.
It's possible. It's possible they grabbed some fish or sea creatures while they were down in the sea. This particular translation, I don't want to get into this too much, but most of the time when dolphins show up in Jewish texts, they didn't understand dolphins the way we do. Our ancestors weren't seafarers. They didn't really spend a lot of time on boats. And so when they speak of dolphins, normally the word is like dolphinus, and you can tell it's borrowed straight from the Greek. And then if there's a translation, like Rashi says, oh, these are sirene in French. So mermaids is how we would say that in English. And the Talmud actually describes the biology of a dolphin correctly, saying that they give birth like a man, which is to say they're mammals. They have live children. But Rashi says that's not what it means, actually. Rashi says, oh, that means they give birth with the aid of men. So they seduce sailors, and that's how they're able to have babies.
Well, they must have had a different purpose in mind.
Oh my. All right. I knew we were going to get one. I knew we were going to get one. All right. Let's keep going.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So checking back in, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense. So we see here that we're not only getting gifts for the construction of this tabernacle, we're getting gifts for the operation of the tabernacle. The operational expenses are part of the nonprofit grants, to use modern terminology. And continuing here, it's translated here. Avnei Shoham is translated as lapis lazuli. It says lapis lazuli for other stones for setting, for the ephod, and for the breastpiece. Now, there's really, you can't just leave this untranslated. You kind of have to pick a stone, and you just got to use your best guess on which stone we're talking about here. But the stones of the ancient world had very different meanings and very different usages. And most scholars are moving away from shoham being lapis lazuli, because we already have a word for lapis lazuli. If you turn back to page 478, this is from last week's Parsha. Right at the end here, we have this very, I was about to say enigmatic. It's not enigmatic. The passage is incredibly clear. What's unclear is that we don't like it at all. We're very uncomfortable with what this says. But I'll just read it to you here. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. Now, what it means to see God, what it means to be in the presence of God, to see a footstool, what it means to say that there's a pavement, it's unclear. Actually, I shouldn't say that. The text is very clear. What we don't like about it is that we're all very accustomed to the Maimonides God, the God who has no body, the God who has no likeness of a body. And you have to say, what does this mean to see God? What does it mean that all of these 74 people all saw God? And they all eat a meal with God, apparently. And was God eating too? This introduces a lot of questions. for our conversation, well, we'll have to save that for another time. We'll come back around to Mishpatim next year. But for our purposes, I want to point out that the pavement of sapphire in the Hebrew here is livnat hasapir. So sapir, sapphire, that seems like a slam dunk translation, right? That's an obvious translation. Sapir, sapphire, doesn't get any simpler than that, except most people say that's wrong. Most people say sapir does not mean sapphire, that the sapphire stone had not been commercially extracted at this point. That the word sapir eventually gets attached to what we know as sapphires in sort of in the classical era, sort of the Roman Empire time. But up to this point, if you see the word sapir, it means lapis lazuli. And lapis was actually an incredibly important stone because it was a stone that you could carve into jewelry, and it was a stone that could be ground up and made into dye. I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of you're in Jerusalem, you're having a wonderful time in the Jewish capital, and then you say to yourself, there are other religions that hold this place in high esteem. Maybe I should go check out some of their sites. And so you wander over to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there is a massive amount of blue. The walls are blue, the artwork is blue, everything is blue. And from our point of view, it might just look like a strange aesthetic choice. But if people could come from 400, 500 years ago, and we could talk to them, they would tell us that this was a sign of enormous wealth. This blue is called ultramarine, and it was made by smashing up lapis lazuli. And it was incredibly rare and incredibly hard to find this color of blue in ancient or medieval architecture. And so, yeah, please.
I wanted to, is this the same blue that's referred to in, is it Ezekiel's vision of God and the sapphire or blue or purple's under God's feet in those visions that we sometimes read about? And I don't know which prophet it is.
That's not ringing a bell. The word that comes to my mind is with Ezekiel as chashmal. That there's sort of like some sort of field of lightning or static electricity or something like that that surrounds Ezekiel.
I'm actually thinking about the color, the blue color.
Right. It might be. I don't remember offhand. I don't have the book of Ezekiel handy with me right now, unfortunately. But I tell you what, we'll talk about that tomorrow in our prophets class. I want to answer this question. I just don't have a good answer right now. But it would be interesting to compare visions of God, right? To compare what's going on in Mishpatim to what's going on in Ezekiel, definitely.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I think it's in the Haftarah for the first day of Shavuot. So I'm looking through it just real quickly.
Well, let's take a look here.
1321. There's something about amber.
Right. So the amber is the chashmal. The word for amber in Greek is electros, because you could actually rub amber together and get quite a charge of static electricity.
I didn't mean to divert us, but
no, it's okay. It's okay. I'm skimming Ezekiel here, and it's not a text that really can stand to be skimmed. There's so much going on here.
I know.
I don't see the color blue showing up here, but
all right, I will do some homework as well on that. But the other,
yeah, you and me both. I will look into this a little further because it is an interesting question. I remember the first time I encountered this text in the end of Mishpatim. And I said, what on earth is this?
And that's what
Because-
that was my second question, kind of what were, you mentioned several times that there were objections, that people had a lot of problems with this text. And I'm curious to hear what those objections were.
So the objections are sort of twofold. One is we have references in other places to people not being able to see God and survive. And so here we have 74 people seeing God, and we
Right.
also have references to when you are in the presence of God, you don't need to eat and drink. You know, Moses didn't eat or drink for 40 days on Mount Sinai. But we have here a large group of people going up the mountain, seeing God and having a meal, presumably with God. And so that's one set of objections. And then the other one is to say that what are they seeing exactly? You know, we don't really, as a general rule, we don't buy into the old man with the big white beard version of God. And yet this text does point in that direction. This text points to God having a bodily form. And of course, Maimonides and many other rabbis are going to have to run in here and say, no, it doesn't mean that. It seems like it means that, but it definitely doesn't. And when there's a, if I remember, there's a note here. Yeah, down at the bottom on page 479, they sort of break down the word saw, and they say they did not actually see anything. They came to understand the reality of God more clearly, as one might say, I see.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. I mean, that works in English, so, you know, it's good enough.
But when you mentioned colors, that's a bit more visual.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's one thing to say see means understand, but what are they understanding when they see a pavement of sapphire, when they see a pavement of either sapphire or lapis lazuli? Very hard to say, very hard to break that down exactly. And it's open for conversation. It's open for a lot of interpretation. So part of the reason I think this is lapis lazuli also is it says he's under his feet there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. If you look at lapis lazuli, you will often see it's mostly blue, but it has veins of gold in it. And whether those veins of gold color, they're not actually gold, but whether these veins of gold color are desirable or whether they detract from the purity of the stone is just a matter of taste. It's a matter of aesthetics. And some people like the way the blue and the gold play with each other. And some people want lapis that's a little more purely blue. And this appears to be pointing in that direction, and wouldn't be a particularly good way to describe the quality of a sapphire. So that's what I'm going to let you know. But then when we turn back to 487, it leaves us with the question, okay, so what are avnei shoham? If that's being translated here as lapis lazuli, what are avnei shoham? And probably it is onyx. It's a black stone, and the sort of I think it's a better aesthetic fit. I mean, this is all just a matter of taste, I suppose. But if you could imagine the settings on the tabernacle being made of a bright blue stone, it's going to really that's going to be the thing you see. That's going to be the thing you notice. I think aesthetically, it makes more sense for the setting places to be a darker stone. But that is just me bringing my own personal sense of style, and so other people might have a very different opinion about that. All right, so this next line here, verse 8, this is the line. This is the verse from Parashat Terumah. If you're gonna open a book and you're gonna see Parashat Terumah quoted, this is the quote you're gonna see. my old synagogue in Evanston, Illinois, when you walked into the sanctuary, this was the line that was written on the wall as you walked in. In the Hebrew, "Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham." Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. So, not a lot has actually happened here. Let's sort of keep that in mind. This is all in the preface. God says, "I want you to bring me gifts, and these are the ones I want you to bring, and then make me a sanctuary, asuli mikdash, and I will dwell among you." And then it goes on, "Exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make them." So God wants something here, or certainly appears to want something here, and the specifics of it
Oh,
seem less important than the desire, than the thing that God is asking for. But what is it that God is asking for? God wants some capacity to dwell among us. Does God really need that? I mean, from a sort of philosophical perspective, we are probably inclined to say that God is everywhere and can do this without our help. God wants to dwell among us. God can dwell among us. Or the flip side of the conversation, if God is everywhere, God doesn't dwell among us in a specific way. God can't be extra in one place and less in other places if God is everywhere. This doesn't exactly fit the way many of us think of God, the way many of us try to imagine, what is God going through? What is it like? What does God see and know and do? And you say, okay, I need you to build me like this little camper van so that I can come with you. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like the enormous God who was able to split the sea, who thundered at Mount Sinai, who created the universe. And here, I need you to build me this thing so I can stay with you. So many people have wrestled with this seeming contradiction, and there are a lot of different approaches. I'm curious to hear what you all think about this conundrum. What does it mean that God wants us to build something so that God can dwell with us?
I think it reflects the covenantal nature of our relationship with God. It isn't that God can't be everywhere. It's where can we put in our efforts to bring God to us, and it's our effort to fulfill our portion of the connection, and the notion of shachanti, to dwell is a place where you're invited, where you're open. So building a place where we can make ourselves open to God's presence brings God's presence into that place. I think it's a powerful statement of how we have a part in this. We have a partnership in creation. We have a partnership in God's continuing presence in our world today, in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's well said. Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts about this?
Maybe more for the people to have a place that's special or beautiful so that they can almost like meditate and sense God in a beautiful setting. Even though God's everywhere, like a place for us or for them.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. God might be everywhere, but we're not everywhere. and so we need our own way to channel that connection. So there's one other thing I want to point out here. This is not the only place you can see this, but this construction that's being made here, this thing that's being made here, is generally called the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Here, God doesn't call it the Mishkan. God calls it the Mikdash. Mikdash from the word Kadesh or Kodesh. So this is the holy place. This is the holy thing. But you do see this word Mishkan in the verse. It's just in the verb, shachanti.
Which verse, which one?
This is verse 8 we're looking at on page 487. So Suli Mikdash v'shachanti betocham. So shachanti, I will dwell, is the same root as the word Mishkan. The tabernacle is usually translated in English, or literally the dwelling place. And this is the same root also as the word Shekhinah. So the Shekhinah, the dwelling of God, the indwelling of God in the world, is sort of theologically, it's very connected to this particular verse. You know, what does it mean for God to be seemingly reduced, seemingly present in the world in one way and therefore absent from the rest of the world in that same way? And this is where the Kabbalists have a lot of fun talking about sphirot, talking about emanations, talking about the presence of God, and how, you know, we could spend all day asking the question, can God do things that seem undoable? If you say God is everywhere, does that mean God can't be not in a place? If I say God can do anything, does that mean God can make a square triangle? We could have a lot of fun with that. We're not going to, but we could. But the point is here that this is, according to the Kabbalists, this is where the Shekhinah is present in the life of biblical Israel, or at least in this generation. And then later, the Mishkan is going to get transferred into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple in Jerusalem. All right, we'll keep going here. So, verse 10, they shall make an ark of acacia wood. The word ark, aron, it just means like a box or a closet or something like that. The aron is it's where you put your clothes in an Israeli apartment, and the aron in your kitchen is you can put your dishes in it. So it's a storage thing. It's nothing in particular. Ark is such a fancy sounding word in English. It strikes us. It has this like very, very ancient resonance because of its use here. The ark where Moses is put, and of course Noah's ark, and we don't use the word other times in English. We don't talk about arks unless you're building a spaceship to rescue a few humans before the asteroid hits or something like that. But generally speaking, we don't use the word ark in this meaning.
Isn't Noah's Ark a different word?
Aron.
Yeah, Rabbi, isn't Noah's Ark? Don't think it's a different word than Aron.
It's a teva. Yes, that's right. So this is also where it gets even trickier. Is that the word teva also means box. And they're both translated as ark, and they probably both more or less mean the same thing. This word Aaron ought to remind us of Moses's brother Aharon, who is of course as the high priest tasked with the rituals related to this thing they're building, and probably his name was not actually Aharon. Probably he had some other name, and Boxman is the name he's given later as a result of his duties. So, all right, but they shall make the ark of shittim, which is translated here as acacia wood. A lot of people wonder if they're in the desert, how are they getting wood? There actually are a number of trees that grow in the desert in Egypt, in Sinai, and as well as in southern Israel. It's not if you've been to the Dead Sea and you look around and you say, "Oh, is this what it's all like? This looks miserable." No, it's not actually. There's almost as much variation in desert in Israel as there's variation in other climates. Some of the deserts are much more welcoming and inviting, and some of them are truly brutal. And so, yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they would have access to wood in the Midbar. So, all right. So we see here, make an ark of acacia wood 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. People always ask me, so I'll just say there are two opinions about the length of a cubit. One is from my elbow to my wrist is a cubit, and the other is from my elbow to the tip of my finger is a cubit. So which cubit it means here, hard to say. Also, what about people who are like really tall and have huge hands and huge arms? The text doesn't really get into that. There wasn't so much specificity back then. All right, overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding round about. Cast 4 gold rings for it to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one of its side walls and 2 on the other. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side walls of the ark for carrying the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark. They shall not be removed from it, and deposit the ark in the ark, the tablets of the pact, which I will give you. Yes.
Okay, so that's the part that I've been looking at here. So I'm intrigued as to why you could not remove the poles. Okay.
Great question.
Okay, so why weren't the poles permanently mounted in there? It doesn't sound like they were. It sounds like they were free to move back and forth.
Yes.
In its ring housing. But I also want to point out that, and I was just doing a little search here because I was fascinated by why would they use that particular wood?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that particular wood can be found in the negative desert. It can be found in the Middle East. But there's a couple things about it. One, it's a very, very, very hard wood. It's harder than maple, harder than oak, and some of the other hardwoods. So it was fascinating, but there aren't oaks out there. There aren't maples.
Right,
okay?
right.
So that was the strongest wood that they could find. But it was also very thorny wood. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't exactly something that you would want to, go over and play around with. So there's a certain amount of pain in getting that wood.
Right.
But here's the part that really fascinates me next to the fact about why the poles are in the camera. First of all, that wood is extremely insect resistant because it generates some sort of whatever chemical but they didn't have to cover it, but yet they still covered that wood,
right,
which had a very nice appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Could be, hewn, but they covered it. Every place there was no exposed wood.
Right.
So they could have found some other wood that they could have used that probably would have been a lot easier to get.
Probably, yeah.
But they chose this wood, and yet they still wanted to cover it.
Right,
So
right. It's a great point. Yeah. So yeah, the acacia wood is very hard, and like you say, very hard to work with. Also, if you've been in the Negev and seen the acacia trees, they are very knotty looking. They sort of twist and turn, and imagining trying to get a straight pole out of one of them, it's pretty wild to think about. You'd have to find just the right one. You'd have to find just the right tree.
But not removing the poles is the part that really was. What's the explanation?
It's interesting, right? So we have these poles that are they're inserted into the rings in a way that it looks like you're supposed to put the poles in, move the tabernacle when you need to move it, and then set it down and take the poles out. Because if the poles are supposed to stay in, why would you mount them to rings? Why not just permanently mount them to the sides?
Right.
And it's very strange because it says in verse 15 very clearly, the poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be removed from it. So it seems to me, and this is well, there are some sources to back this up, but this is more in the realm of speculation. If you mounted it permanently, then it would be permanent by nature. Whereas mounting it with the rings, even if you never take the pole out, it points to the temporary, impermanent nature of the thing. So it looks like the sort of thing that you can take apart. It looks mobile. It looks impermanent, even though you're not going to treat it that way. And so it's meant to remind us of this time in the wilderness, meant to remind us of this time when we walked it around a bunch of places. So it's a good question though, and I that might not be an entirely satisfactory answer.
I see where you're going with the point though. It is interesting.
It's worth noting that the length of the poles and the length of the ark, specifically with the poles, is longer than the doorway into the temple in Jerusalem. And so there's a question, how on earth did they get this into the Holy of Holies? And there's a midrash that says it was basically magic. They carried it into the Holy of Holies, and the poles just sort of shrank of their own accord, and then resume their proper length. But if you look at the dimensions, there's no way they should have been able to get it into the building. Yeah, I mean, I've had a couch like that. What can you do?
Okay, wait, so the ark was eventually brought to the Holy of Holies. What happened to the rest of the Mishkan after they got to the land of Israel?
That's a great question. So we have some stories in the book of Joshua, in the book of Samuel. There are stories of the ark going out to battle. That part of what the ark would do, it was a way to sort of bring God, or bring the holiness of God to the wars that we were fighting. And so that worked out sometimes, and there's one very famous case where it doesn't work out, and the Philistines capture the ark, and they capture it, and they take it to the temple of their god, and things begin to go very bad for them. And the text basically says they were plagued. And it's unclear the nature of the plague, but the nature of the cure probably points us to the nature of the plague, because they are supposed to return the ark to Israel and also offer golden mice and golden hemorrhoids, is what the text says. And on the assumption that the golden constructions are a reflection of the plague that they were suffering, it sounds like they didn't have a very good time. So the ark is returned to us, and that's an interesting story. Also, it's a famous story of these guys. They're taking the ark back, and the wagon that the ark is on gets a little wobbly, and so one of them puts his hand on the ark to stabilize it. And this is considered to be a lack of faith in God, and he is struck dead. But the ark comes back. Eventually, it is captured in battle, and then we never hear from it again. We never hear about the ark again until the Indiana Jones movie. But
by the way, the handles there were not gold.
Right. Yes.
They look like.
Spielberg made a number of choices that a lot of people said, maybe not.
But based on the construction of the ark, with the wood type and the fact that it was plated in gold, there's every possibility that thing would still exist today without
It very well could. Yeah. I mean, especially, depending on where it was taken, there are plenty of things get pulled out of the desert. I was just reading about an Assyrian siege rat that has been rediscovered in southern Israel. So,
What?
all right, I do want to point out one more thing, and then we'll have to wrap this up. The specific instructions here about the plating it with gold or covering it with gold. Probably this is gold leaf that is being done, and so this assumes a fairly high amount of technical skill, and also it assumes that whoever is doing this has the ability to get a fire going and to have a forge and sort of goldsmithing techniques and technology that you might not necessarily assume are happening when you're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Whoever did this brought his tools with him, and also they would have had to have access to a sufficient amount of firewood to get the fire hot enough. Yeah, Steve.
I do have one last question. I think you're getting pretty close to the end here, but there is one thing I want to point out here, because it's the whole thing after the polls really interesting too. It says, Hashem said, deposit in the ark the tablets of the pact, which I will give you.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm always fascinated by that, because I don't remember seeing any place else, at least I don't recall, where Moses pulls out those tablets. Once they're in the ark, they stay in the ark.
Yes. Yes.
So I find that fascinating. So what do the commentators say about the fact that the tablets are never pulled out?
Sure. Okay, that's a great question. So into the ark go the tablets as well as the smashed up bits of the first set of tablets. And then there's some other stuff that gets saved. Aaron's staff that turns into an almond tree. One little bit of manna gets saved. If you look at just about any depiction of the Ten Commandments, what you have is you got your two tablets, right? And you have 5 commandments on one and then 5 commandments on the other. But actually, most scholars say that that's not what's going on. That the reason there are 2 tablets is that you have 2 copies of the covenant, one for us and one for God. But since we can't actually hand one copy to God to keep in heaven, we keep both copies. But this is essentially, like any important document, you want to keep it in a safe place. And like probably like most important documents, you don't actually have to pull it out very often, and you probably have a copy that is not your official copy that you put in the safe deposit box. But yeah, does that get to your question?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, it is 10 o'clock. We should wrap this up. Thank you all for coming. Wish you a great week, Shavua Tov, and
See you soon.
tell your friends about this. They can check it out on YouTube in a couple of days.